I'm going to be changing out the drivetrain on my giant Anthem 27.5 with a Shimano 1x11. I currently run a 1x10, which I'll show you here in a minute. So this video is going to be a review of a Shimano 1x11 drivetrain on a mountain bike, and in it I'll also do some comparison to the 1x10. Before I install the new drivetrain, I want to show the current drivetrain that I'm running to give a comparison. So again, this is a 1x10. I've got a Shimano 1136 rear cassette. I've got a KMC X10L chain. Sometimes I run the SL, which is a little bit lighter. And this drivetrain uses the Race Face Evolve crankset with a Race Face 34 tooth narrow wide front chainring. When I built this drivetrain, there were not a lot of options out there, and Race Face was kind of leading the way with their narrow wide, and so that's why I went with the Race Face. The Shimano one was not available. One of the reasons that I'm doing this upgrade is so I can lighten up the crankset. This is more of a downhill free ride crank. It's not that heavy for a downhill crank, but I do want to go with one that's a little bit lighter. I also just want to modernize my drivetrain. Also, the 10-speed derailleurs seem to be a little bit harder to shift once you get up to the higher end. So that's another reason. And finally, my son needs a drivetrain for his bike, so I thought this was a good opportunity for me to upgrade mine. So here we go. Before I do the surgery on the bike, I want to show the drivetrain that's going on it. Of course, the XT crankset. This is a 175 length crank arm, and you can buy this as the crank arms only, which is what I prefer. And I'm going with a 34 tooth front chain ring because the trails I ride are not mountainous. For my local home trails, I don't need a really small chain ring. A lot of the XT 1xs come with a 32. I'm going to go with the 34 so that I can have a bigger gear when I'm riding to the trailhead on the road. Similarly, I'm not going with the 42, the 1142. I'm going to go with the 1140 rear cassette for a few reasons. One, like I said, I don't need a huge, large cog in the back, that really low gear. Also, I like the tighter spread between the gears, especially when you get up into this range. It's a little bit less of a jump when you shift up here. And also, this one's lighter than the 42. The weight that I've seen on this is about 410 grams versus 433 for the 1142. Going with the KMC X11 chain. KMC chains last a long time for me on my mountain bike, and I really prefer them now for riding. Of course, the 11-speed shifter. And then the rear derailleur. This is the GS derailleur, which is the medium cage. And you don't need a long cage on a 1x setup. A medium cage works just fine. I've got the drivetrain installed, and it's a really good looking finish that Shimano has put. It's kind of a shiny black. I also like the touch of putting the chainring bolts going in from the inside. It does use 4 chainring bolts, but instead of doing it from the outside, you turn the bolts from the inside. It really makes for a nice finish by not seeing those chainring bolts. Since this is designed to be a single front chainring only, it's nice that those are concealed. And this is, of course, the clutch rear derailleur. So with the clutch disengaged, it lightens up the spring on the derailleur cage so you can get the rear wheel in and out of the bike very easily. And then once the wheel's in the bike, you would engage the clutch, and that really stiffens up that spring and reduces chain slap. And this is a very quiet running drivetrain without the chain slap, of course. And then just as the chain moves over the cassette. It's very smooth and very quiet. I like the shifter on this. It's got some texture to it and gives you some grip and feel. This lever is what releases the cable, and what's nice about this is it's going to release either by using your finger, in other words using like a trigger motion, or by using your thumb and pushing it. Both of those motions are going to release the cable and go into a smaller cog or a harder gear. I typically on the trail will use the push-push method. I think it's more of a natural motion, so pushing here to go to an easier gear, pushing here to go to a harder gear. If I'm riding on the road to the trailhead and my hands are here and I want to reach over, shift a gear and go back, then I'll use the trigger. Other than that, I will typically use the push-push mechanism. Whether you push or pull this lever, you're going to go one gear at a time. This allows you to dump 3 gears at a time when you're going into an easier gear by pushing here. So I can go 1, 2, 3, and that will again go up 3 bigger cogs or 3 easier gears, which is really nice because as a 1x system, sometimes you want to dump a bunch of gears, similar to the way you could do with a front derailleur. So if you come around a corner and you got a big hill and you really just want to dump a bunch of gears, if you had a front derailleur, you could just go into a smaller chain ring, and that's about 2 or 3 gears. With this, since it's a 1x, it's nice that you can just whack that lever and go up 3 bigger cogs. You do have a gear indicator here for visual reference of what gear you're in. I use that sometimes, not a whole lot. It is removable. If you're a major weight weenie and you want to remove that, you can do so. Before I talk about how this rides, I want to put the bike in a work stand and show how crisp shifting this is. So I'll run through the gears here, but as you see as I pedal and shift, this is just a very solid, crisp shifting drivetrain. So as you can see, it is a very crisp shifting drivetrain. I would say it is more crisp, more tactile than the older drivetrain that I had, which was again a Shimano rear derailleur and cassette, but a race face, front chainring, and I did have a Shimano shifter. So this is definitely more of a tactile feel, and it's also easier to shift. So when the gears get up into this range, the tension gets greater, but there's not much more of an effort required like I had on my older drivetrain, where it took a lot more effort once you got up into these bigger cogs in the back. So there is a little bit of a jump between gears, obviously because it's a mountain bike and you've got to go from this 11 all the way up to this 40. So if you're used to road, mountain bike gears are going to have more of a jump, which is not a big deal on the trail. It's when you're riding on the road trying to hold a consistent pace going to the trailhead, then you sometimes it's hard to find the exact gear, but that's kind of the nature of mountain bike cassettes. So today's ride, I actually had about 11 miles to get to the trailhead, and just to talk about the gearing. So again, this has a 34 tooth in the front. And by the way, let me mention something that I didn't mention in the intro. And because I'm using this on a 27.5, I can get away with a little bit bigger gear. So that's another reason why I wanted to go with a 34 in the front and a 40 in the back. With the 29er, it's like you're adding a little bit bigger gear. So you just need to weigh that when you're deciding which one you want to go with. But on the road, I was able to hold about 22, 23 miles per hour with my normal cadence. Once I got above that, then I started to spin out a little bit. Coming back from the trailhead, I had a pretty good tailwind, and I was holding about 27, 28 miles an hour in some spots, and I was spinning quite a bit. So I would say above 25, it starts to get a little uncomfortable with how fast you're spinning. And that's just to kind of give you a reference of what this 34 tooth in the front and 11 in the back would feel like. So to do a little bit of comparison with the 1x10 that I had on here, I would say I probably kept the weight about the same. I didn't really drop weight. I may have even added a few grams. It's not much. But the main advantage of the 1x11 is that now the bike is a little bit more versatile for riding in the mountains, having this very large cog in the back. So that really, to me, is the main advantage with the 1x10, I'm sorry, 1x11 over the 1x10. So it's going to depend on what you want to use the bike for. If you don't need that super low gear, then 1x10 is going to be fine. But the advantage for me now is that my bike can ride in the mountains a little bit easier, and I can go with a bigger chain ring in the front. So by putting that 40 on the back, I can get away with a little bit bigger gear in the front. Now, if you ride a 29er, like I said, you may want to go with the 42 in the back over the 40, or you may want to go with the 32 in the front over the 34. So that'll wrap it up for this review of the Shimano XT 1x11 drivetrain. As always, if the video was helpful for you, give it a thumbs up for me if you don't mind. And if you have any questions or comments, leave them below and I'll try to get to them. Thanks for watching.